Hi there. This seems a little loud. My name is Eva Galperin, and I'm here to radicalize you. So I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. We're a digital civil liberties organization based out of San Francisco. How many of you here are already familiar with EFF? A few people? One or two? Then you know that we're a sticker and t-shirt company with a law firm attached and some engineers, but mostly t-shirts and stickers. We're very successful when it comes to t-shirts and stickers. So I am here to talk to you about a project that I launched against my will and against my better judgment. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I found when I made this project happen, what conclusions I came to, and most importantly, I'm going to talk about how you can both do something about this particular problem that I decided to look at, but also about how you can apply this framework to deal with other large, scary, intractable problems in INFOSEC and in your community. So we're going to talk a little bit about spouseware and stalkerware. In order to talk about spouseware and stalkerware, first we must go back in time. We're going to go all the way back in time to 2017. You may not remember that far back. There were dinosaurs roaming the earth. It was very strange. And between about 2012 and 2017, I did most of my security research on APTs. I cared about state actors, Vietnam, Lebanon, Kazakhstan. So, not your particularly high-end nation states, but if there was a sort of lazy state actor that was sloppily targeting journalists or activists, I was interested in exposing them because it wasn't that hard, and also because journalists and activists were very easy targets. At the end of 2017, I discovered something terrible, which was that one of the security researchers with whom I had been doing my work for all of these years was outed as a serial rapist. So I read an article which was an interview with one of his victims, and she was at the time, I think she was a teenager, and the journalist asked her, well, why did you take so long to come forward? Why didn't you tell anybody what happened to you? And she said, well, I was a teenage punk kid, and he was this big important hacker, and I was scared that he was going to hack my computer and he was going to hack my phone, and this was something that he had threatened to do, and I just didn't feel safe. And I got mad. I got really, really mad because I felt complicit in this. I had sort of built up my career with this guy, and now here he was making this woman feel like she was this big and like her devices were not safe. And I didn't ever want anybody to feel that way again. So I did what most people do when they're very, very angry. I tweeted. I don't know how many of you here are familiar with my Twitter account. It has some followers. So at the time, I had just read this interview, and so I tweeted, if you are a woman who has been sexually abused by a hacker who then threatened to compromise your devices, contact me and I will make sure that they are properly examined. Now, I thought that maybe one or two people would call me, maybe a journalist might call me, maybe I would have a little bit of work to do. So 9,463 retweets and 16,399 likes later, my inbox was full. I spent a lot of time at one point, I was looking at somewhere between, 12 and 15 contacts a day reaching out to me, telling me the story of the worst thing that had ever happened to them over and over and over again, which, let me tell you, was not great for my mental health. I was not planning to start a project. My plan was just to maybe help one or two people, but instead, hundreds of people reached out to me, and they were really, sort of piling up day after day. And I was able to help many of them, but I learned some very interesting things along the way. The most the most interesting thing that I learned was that most people don't actually understand what kind of help they need when you offer them help with forensic analysis. If you tell people, I will look to see whether or not your device has been compromised, they will tell you, yes, of course, my device has been compromised. More often than not, what I saw was a lot of account compromise. I saw email accounts being compromised. I saw Google accounts, Apple, like iCloud, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. If it had a login, it was compromised. And I saw this over and over and over again. And it was incredibly common for people to come to me unable to tell the difference between somebody compromising one or more of their accounts or having completely compromised their device. And in fact, it was much more common for people to believe that their devices had been compromised than people to believe that their accounts had been compromised, because in the sort of popular imagination, hacking is getting root on a device. And so they assume that that's the easiest thing to do, that that's the simplest and most default way of doing things. And then I had to spend a lot of time explaining to them, no, it's probably your account. And in some ways, that's good news, because we have advice for people who are worried about account compromise. We have a game plan for account compromise. If somebody comes to you with an account compromise, you tell them, well, first off, change all your passwords, make sure that they are unique, make sure they're strong, make sure you're using a password manager, make sure you're using the highest level of two-factor authentication that you're comfortable with. Now, that last bit is a little bit controversial, but generally, yes, I would like everybody out there to be using YubiKeys for everything all the time. But often I am contacted by people who cannot spend $50 on a YubiKey, who will not use a YubiKey if you give it to them, or who find that entire process very stressful. And if all I can get them to do is use Google Authenticator or Authy or even a text message, that's better than nothing. So we have advice for account compromise. And usually what I tell people is, after you have secured your accounts, after you have done all of these things, if you're still seeing problems, then we go looking for device compromise. And we also have things that we can point people to. So there, the security page that you have on your Facebook account, which shows you the various things that have been logging into Facebook pretending to be you. There's a similar page for Apple products. And I will slowly but surely walk people through all of this stuff. But sometimes it really is a rat. Every once in a while, somebody changes all of their passwords, uses a password manager, has 2FA set up, and they are still having their accounts compromised again and again and again. And they call me up extremely worried. In the cases that came to me, it was a rat probably like 1 time out of 50. The vast majority of the cases that I was looking at, which were usually men spying on women, but also occasionally women spying on women, women spying on men, men spying on men, every combination of people that you can imagine, the whole handshake. But sometimes it really was a rat. And in the cases where it was a rat, those were the most intrusive and frightening cases. Those were the cases where people came to me and felt the most out of control. They felt that they didn't know what they could trust. Sometimes these cases involved stalking, they involved physical harassment, they involved physical abuse, they involved kidnapping, sometimes kidnapping of the victim's children. And so these were the most intense cases. And the problem with these cases, which involve a rat on somebody's device, turned out to be that we don't have good advice for them at all. And so I ended up working on it alone. I just had this, enormous queue, and I became the, sort of frontline IT for all of the world's abused women. We like to think of this in human rights as the hero model. And that means that one person heroically shows up, does all the work, everybody comes to them, they become the single point of failure, but they also get, glowing profiles in Wired, and really nice articles written about them in magazines in which they have dramatic photos taken of them, and they get to look very heroic. I'm here to tell you that this is bullshit. This is actually extremely bad for your mental health. This is not the way that we should be doing things. Kill your heroes. Kill them right now. In the words of Tina Turner, my personal favorite warrior poet, we don't need another hero. Something, something, Thunderdome. But instead, what we need to do is we need to think about ways in which to maximize our efforts, so that when you're looking at a problem, you're not just helping one person, but you're looking at a way that you can change the system in order to help many people. And I'm very lucky in that I have a model for this. EFF, in addition to having all of these engineers and all of these activists, is a law firm. And what we do is called impact litigation. Impact litigation is made up of a sort of a series of lawsuits. And the idea is that when you file these lawsuits are designed to create good precedent in the law, or to strike down bad precedent in the law in sort of novel ways. And when people come to EFF with cases, one of the very first things that we ask ourselves is this going to help people beyond the people who are directly involved in the case? Is this going to have far-reaching applications? Because helping one person at a time is not what impact litigators do. So I tried to think of a way to be sort of an impact engineer and try to figure out where I could sort of push things so that I would not have to be help desk. To begin with, you may ask yourself, what is stalkerware or spouseware? What are these rats that I was finding on people's computers and on their mobile phones? Spouseware and stalkerware is a sort of commercial application which is sold for the purpose of covertly spying on someone's computer or mobile device, specifically without their knowledge, and sending you all of the information back from that device. Mobile rats are extremely popular. For the same reason that spying on phones is very popular with governments. Governments love to spy on phones because you keep all of your information inside your phone. You're carrying a tracking device around in your pocket at all times. That's super useful for the government if they'd like to know where you are. It's also super useful for a stalker or a harasser or a former partner or an abusive current partner if they want to know where you are and they want to control you. You keep all of your passwords in your phone. You keep your emails in your phone, your text messages, obviously all of your voice phone calls, a thing which we still occasionally do on a phone, like if my mother calls me. Phones are incredible sources of information, and you can use that information to control people. And just as governments find this extremely useful, abusers find this useful as well. So how do we know that it is stalkerware and not some other kind of application? Well, we do a Google search. You just search for, how do I spy on my husband's cell phone? How do I spy on my wife's cell phone? How do I catch my, cheating boyfriend? How do I, spy on my girlfriend's phone? Or iPad, or whatever. And these things come right up. So you can see that I've already got a bunch of results here. The other way that you know that it is stalkerware or spouseware, the kind of software that you're using to spy on your spouse in a non-consensual manner, is they'll tell you. It's right there in the market copy. Access to CocoSpy gives you the lead on how to spy on your wife with ease. You do not have to worry about where she goes, who she talks to, or the websites that she visits. Mind you, you really didn't have to worry about these things before. You probably shouldn't start now. Maybe have a conversation with your wife. Don't spy on her. That's gross. And as you can see, the marketing doesn't stop there. This is a screenshot from a mobile spy application. And the screenshot spends a bunch of time describing how common cheating is. Cheating, extremely common in relationships. And it is accompanied by a photograph of a man grabbing a woman in a threatening manner. The woman is bruised and bleeding. And make no mistake, this app is on the side of the abuser. This app is saying, if you want to be that abusive guy, what you should do is you should buy our app so that you know whether or not that woman is cheating on you and you can give her a black eye. There is no question what this thing is for. Now, one of the big problems with this use of spyware and stalkerware and other types of rats is that for a very long time, hacker culture considered this to be borderline acceptable. There were a lot of arguments that these apps actually have legitimate uses. Some of the very early work that I did on rats being used to target activists and journalists in Syria who opposed the Assad government involved a rat called DarkComet. So DarkComet was a free rat written by this guy, Pierre Sueur, whose name I will make sure no one ever forgets. And he went by the name, I think, DarkComet Hacker, just in case you were wondering what it was that he developed. And in July of, I think it was July of 2012, he shut down the DarkComet project. And he said, when I first built this rat and made it available for free, I thought guys were just going to use it to spy on their girlfriends. I didn't think it was going to be used by governments to spy on, on journalists and activists. I didn't think it was going to get anybody killed. And he thought that this was a really important distinction. I don't. I think that if you are making an app that allows abusive people to spy on their partners, you are enabling abuse. You're enabling beatings. You are on the side of that guy holding the woman who is bruised and bleeding, and let there be no question of that. So for a very long time, hacker culture seemed to think that this was okay. Because, if your partner is cheating on you, then that's not like the government spying on you. The government is bad. So how can you tell the difference between one of these stalkerware or spouseware apps and an app like Find My iPhone or Life 360, which is geared towards families who want to keep track of where their children are and that kind of thing, and all the apps that are designed to help you know what your employees are doing if you are running a business and you have given them a company-issued device. And I think that the most important thing, the key to understanding the difference between stalkerware/spouseware and these other kinds of dual-use products is deception. The point of stalkerware and spouseware is to work covertly. Even if you need to have the password and the username in order to install the app in the first place, if afterwards it does not remind the user that it is there and it does not make it clear persistently that this is an app, this is what it's called, this is what it does, then it is deceptive. And that is what makes it stalkerware or spouseware, and that is what makes it not okay. So the next thing that I did was I downloaded a bunch of these apps, and I went through VirusTotal, and I checked to see how many of the sort of mobile antivirus companies were actually picking these apps up. How many of them were detecting them? And I got miserable results. These are screenshots from a test that I ran this spring. And as you can see, we've got a result of 7 out of 60, I think, for the Truth Spy. And here is a slightly better result, which is 10 out of 61. But still, as a general rule, if you have one of these apps on your device and you have antivirus and you run your antivirus program and you say, is there something malicious on my device? The chances that it will not be found as of this spring are extremely high. And I think that is a case of the entire antivirus industry falling down on the job. So one of the first things that happened after I published this research was Kaspersky took one look at it and felt bad. So they made a solemn vow that they were going to do a better job of finding spouseware and stalkerware on people's devices. And they even came up with this new privacy alert that goes up when you see this potentially unwanted software on your device. So I thought that was pretty great. They were followed shortly afterwards by Lookout, which also has mobile products, so I care a lot about mobile AV. And they basically said, oh, we have always done this, which, you know, I'll take it as a win. And then finally, Malwarebytes published both a guide to, you know, how to find spouseware on your devices that also talked about account compromise and talked about the ways in which they were increasing their detection of potentially unwanted programs on people's devices. So this was a great leap forward. Now I have something that I can tell survivors when they come to me looking for information. I can tell them that these are things that you can download. You can go looking for these rats, and the chances that they will be found by these 3 AV services are much, much higher than they were this spring. That makes a big difference. So what can antivirus companies do, assuming that every single one of you is a professional antivirus vendor? Again, detect spouseware and stalkerware. That's not particularly hard. Label it as malicious. Let people know, hey, maybe you don't want this thing on your phone. Maybe you don't want this thing on your computer. Stay on top of it. So one of the biggest problems that I saw was that if the sample was 4 to 6 months old, detection rates were pretty high. But for samples that were a day old or 2 days old, detection rates were incredibly low. And finally, I'm calling on the antivirus industry to share samples because a rising tide lifts all boats. We will all do better if we are protected from this kind of software. And not every AV company has to reinvent the wheel every time. So if you find this stuff, you should share it with other AV companies. And this kind of protection should be cheap and easy and free. Google, by the way, can do a better job of policing the Google Play Store. I have seen multiple reports, including, I think, from most recently from Cornell, showing that that both spouseware and stalkerware, in spite of the fact that it is in violation of the Google Play Store's policies, sometimes still sneaks in there. So Google does not do a particularly good job of policing it. It should not be my job to go and find these apps in the Play Store. I am not paid by Google. I would be paid much better if I was paid by Google. I think that they should put a person on this who is not me. What can developers do? So I assume I am in a room full of people who occasionally have a hand in making products once or twice. So some things that you can do is you can have one page or tab where the user can see all of the accounts that have access to their data and what data they have access to. You can have one page or tab that allows users to see what devices and IP addresses have recently logged into their account. And most importantly, you can support two-factor authentication for logins. And I would be especially happy if it was something stronger than SMS. This is all I ask for. I am simple to please. And next, let's talk a little bit about what governments can do. First, I want to apologize for the fact that this is mostly a US legal analysis. EFF is a law firm, but we are a law firm based in the United States. I have an entire floor of angry American attack lawyers who are experts in US law. So I will sort of skim through this fairly quickly to give you a general idea of what can be done, and then we can talk a little bit about how this framework could also be applied to Romania, or to the rest of Europe, or indeed to the rest of the world. So whenever somebody says there ought to be a law, I am very suspicious. I've seen a lot of bad law written. And so when somebody tells me there ought to be a law, I go, well, let's look at the laws that already exist. So some federal laws that stalkerware and spouseware apps are likely to be breaking at any given moment, just the federal edition. The United States has a sort of government setup where there are laws that apply to every state. Those are federal laws. And then there are state-by-state laws. So that's 50 more sets of laws, all of which apply. So under federal laws, we have the Federal Wiretap Act. We also have the Stored Communications Act. And, of course, the infamous Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or the CFAA. The EFF frequently finds itself at odds with the US government prosecuting hackers under the CFAA, because frequently this is a law that the US government uses to allege that all kinds of security research is actually hacking. But in this particular case, if you are covertly installing a rat on somebody else's device in order to spy on them, yeah, maybe you're violating the CFAA. As you can see here, the US government has, in fact, taken action against companies every once in a while. This was a web page belonging to a company called Stealth Genie, which was a cell phone spy and monitoring app. And as you can see, Stealth Genie is no longer available, and the people who wrote it went to jail. So that was nice. We also have the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has an authority under Section 5, which allows it to go after companies who are engaged in fraudulent or misleading trade practices. Now, the FTC has gone after, I think, 2 different stalkerware companies since about 2012. So in the last 7 years. Math is hard. I'm not an engineer. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer who uses a calculator. So they've gone after 2 different companies in the last 7 years. One was a company that was covertly installing keyloggers on people's computers, and the other one was a company that was selling spouseware that included the ability to hide the application in an image that would then covertly download. So this is very, very clearly for malicious use and for the purpose of fooling somebody into downloading the product onto their device. So most recently, like 2 weeks ago, the FTC took action against a company called Retina-X. Retina-X is a stalkerware and spouseware company that mostly makes mobile products. And what's particularly interesting about the action that the FTC took was that the FTC banned Retina-X from making or selling software until it could write better and more secure software. Their problem with Retina-X was not that they were selling spouseware, it was that they were selling bad spouseware. They had suffered a series of data breaches over the last several years, including a breach of something like a petabyte of data made up of the stuff that all the spying. And so the FTC said, if you cannot secure this data, which is being spied on, you don't get to make spouseware or stalkerware anymore. So that is the most recent action which the FTC has taken. Now, I'll take what I can get. I am happy that the US government has finally decided that these are bad people. I am very excited that the FTC is taking action. But I would really like to see them go a step further. I don't think there's any legitimate use for these products. And so I think going after these companies just because they're not doing a good job of being bad is simply not enough. And finally, in the United States, we have a number of state laws which apply. There are state wiretapping statutes. There are two-party consent laws. In the United States, when you have two people who are engaged in a digital communication, there are some states in which you cannot record it unless you have the consent of all parties. So an app which allows you to covertly record somebody else's conversation is de facto going to be violating the two-party consent law. And in the great state of California, we also have the Consumer Protection Against Consumer Spyware Act. So one of the things that I've been calling on states to do in the United States is to look at the legislation that already exists and to model their state legislation after the CPACSA, which is a terrible, terrible way of shortening it. So yeah, those are the things that that states can do, and I would really like to see other governments sort of model their statutes on these existing statutes, and then use them. That would be nice. And finally, we get to the most important question, which is, what can you do? Every single one of you has, as Liam Neeson once put it, a very particular set of skills. And every one of you has people that you care about. You have groups that you care about. You have groups that you feel that you're affiliated with. You may have a school or an office or a church or loved ones. You may identify as LGBTQ. You may have unpopular political or religious beliefs. There are always people who need protection. And it is my advice that you go out into the communities that you care about and see what they need. The most important takeaway, like if you remember nothing else about this talk, and I assure you, you won't, I want you to remember that every assumption that I made about what women needed in order to feel safe, initially after I read the article with the interview, was wrong. I thought I knew what people needed, and it took me a year and a half of working with people one at a time to really look at the bigger picture and understand that what they needed was a big change in the way that the antivirus industry works, and a big change in the way that government enforces already existing laws instead of just somebody who will show up and do forensic analysis. Because most of us can do forensic analysis, but it takes a really long time. And I would really like for us to find more efficient ways to do our work. So now, let's talk a little bit about the framework that I brought to this problem. Again, you do not personally have to save every woman who is a victim of spousal abuse. You don't have to save everybody who is worried about domestic spying, but you may have some other sort of problem in it. So I recommend starting by formulating the problem, talking to and working with the affected population. If you do not get down on the ground and work with the people who are facing these problems, you are always going to be wrong about what real problems they have. Then go back and reformulate the problem, because I repeat, you were wrong. And then look for ways that you can have an impact beyond just helping one person at a time. Look for the engineer equivalent of impact litigation. The thing that I really love about the hacking community and about the INFOSEC community is that we are such great systems thinkers. That often when we look at a problem, we are not looking at about the tiny details, but we look at the whole thing. And when you look at the whole thing, it gives you the ability to see just where you can push in order to make real change. In architecture, if you look at an arch is made up of stones. And the thing that keeps the arch in place is called the keystone, which is sort of a wedge-shaped stone in the top. And if you look at an arch, you know that if you take that stone out right there, the entire thing will crumble. The same thing is true of other systems. And I challenge every one of you to look at the systems that you want to change, find that keystone, pull it right out. Finally, the very last thing that I want to say is that I don't do this by myself. At EFF, we have more than 100 employees. I have a team of my own, which we call Threat Lab. So shout out to Dave Moss and Cooper Quinton, who work for me. And more importantly, there are other people out in the community who have been doing work on spouseware and stalkerware for years. I specifically would like to point to the work of Harlow Holmes in New York, who works for the Freedom of Press Foundation. She's been doing the sort of very difficult one-on-one work for years. There are also the journalists at Vice's Motherboard who wrote a series of articles called When Spies Come Home, which is specifically about stalkerware and spouseware. They covered all of the data breaches that Retina-X is being held responsible for right now. And if it wasn't for their coverage, chances are that the FTC would not have done anything about it at all. And those are the people that are really doing the work. And it is my hope that the next time that I give this talk, that I will add you to this list of people who are doing the work, or who are at least working on something else. Because every single one of you is capable. I am not a superhero. I do not have any superpowers, but you guys do. And I want you to go out, now that I have radicalized you, find that population that you want to help, and go do it. Questions?
Okay, mics, Lucian here, yes.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you for the talk. My question is whether you've seen these products also marketed as parental controls, because I know I'm a journalist, so from my coverage in the past, over the years of this type of software, I've seen cases where they are using this parental control functionality as justification for their other functionality. I mean, you can use it on so they are trying to make the user responsible for how they use it, right? We created it, it has legitimate purposes like parental control, but if you choose to use it against your wife or your girlfriend, that's on you. That's basically some of the explanations that they've
Yes,
put out.
I absolutely see this stuff marketed as a tool of parental control. And at least in the United States, where I have my angry attack lawyers, the right of parents to spy on their children is not unlimited. It's not 100%. So even in those cases, there are cases which are not legitimate. Furthermore, just saying that you're not responsible for how people use your product because they clicked on a EULA and promised they wouldn't misuse it is some bullshit. And there is a lot of product liability law in the United States which covers this, and you can see sort of parallel law that has developed in Europe. So we're not out of ways in which to fight this. And last of all, the most important thing, don't spy on your children. Just don't spy on your children. Don't spy on your children using secret, hidden applications. Have a conversation with them. Try parenting. Parenting is good.
The problem is there are even security companies who have parental control software, and they sell it as a functionality as part of their endpoint security.
Yes, absolutely. And if that software functions covertly, it is malicious and it should be labeled malicious. This is not an area in which I compromise. Next.
Yes, who's next? Yep, right over there. Keep your hand up, please.
So I noticed mostly it was Android research.
Yes.
Do you have any statistics on like iPhone, or is it because that generally Apple's products will like warn you that this app is trying to use something? Have you seen less of a coverage on that one, or was it that the research was limited to that?
I have in fact seen not just Android, but also iOS malware, which is spouseware and stalkerware. It is increasingly difficult to covertly install this sort of thing on iOS devices, and it's particularly difficult to get it persistence. So often when people come to me with iOS devices that they think are compromised, the first thing that I do is I tell them, just like turn it off and turn it on again. And often they find it very difficult to believe that this is an effective solution. But the very last thing that you should note is that the most common way of spying on iOS devices now is either through Find My Friends or through scraping iCloud backups. Scraping iCloud backups is incredibly common, especially because in relationships, people share their Apple IDs and passwords, not uncommonly. And also because if you have been living with an abuser, the chances that they can guess your password, that they have shoulder surfed your password, that they know the answers to your security questions are not small.
And out of the products that you've listed, have any, because of the way that it was modeled, were there any products that ever detected a rat, for instance, on iOS?
Pardon?
Was there ever a product that would detect a rat on iOS? In that generally they don't, initially most AV companies didn't target iOS. So that's why I'm asking if there are, out of the ones that you've identified, for instance, you don't have to name them or such, but have some of them proved to be efficient in detecting it?
Lookout has an iOS product, but AV in iOS is very limited in what it can do.
Yeah, that's what I was
as you are well aware. And so most of my arguing now happens directly with Apple.
Next
Anyone
question?
else?
I have one, if I may. How do you deal with the kind of, no, here. It's me, sorry. How do you deal with the kind of emotional and mental pressure of the entire issue and the magnitude of it?
Poorly. Yeah, now is not the time to pretend that I am a creature of tremendous grace under pressure, who is incredibly heroic and can handle this. The whole reason I looked for ways to punch above my weight and to change the entire system rather than dealing with the problem one person at a time is because dealing with the problem one person at a time was slowly driving me crazy. It is really hard to get up in the morning and go through 6 or 7 or 9 or 12 different stories from victims of abuse telling you about the worst thing that has ever happened to them. It is really rough, and I have a lot of admiration for the people who actually do this for a living. There's an organization based out of Washington, D.C. called Operation Safe Escape that specifically deals with women who are trying to get out of abusive relationships, and they have a set of people on staff who do nothing but help people lock down their devices, and that is a very, very stressful job.
I agree. So thank you so much for
Thank
doing
you.
this work, and thank you for empowering us to think, to do more systems thinking and to tackle this issue and to hopefully contribute whichever way we can. Thank you for being here, Eva.
Thanks.